I remember getting unreasonably excited when that very first teaser for the Super Mario Galaxy movie dropped. It didn't really make sense because the last Mario movie wasn't really anything special. I honestly found it pretty forgettable. It was exactly that kind of glossy, safe, manufactured film you'd expect from Illumination. But this was different because this was Super Mario Galaxy, the main game I grew up with, the one that felt magical, vast, and limitless. A game that for a lot of people, myself included, defined what Mario could be. Even if people thought the movie was mid, even if I thought the movie was mid, I knew I'd still enjoy it, just because it was Galaxy. That's when I realized Nintendo knows that. In fact, they actually count on that. All of their business practices capitalize on nostalgia, raising prices and releasing games that don't live up to their own legacy, because they know they can. They know that people will still buy their products to hold on to their old nostalgia. And once I saw that, everything started to feel different. I started to see Nintendo's path of blatant greed and borderline depravity that turned a once beloved company into a shadow of what it used to be.
We know more about what makes great games than anyone else. And this is why Nintendo succeeds.
If you're on the younger side, or you aren't super up to date with Nintendo, it's honestly hard to explain how insane Nintendo's run used to be. But it didn't start that way. The GameCube didn't sell that well. It was up against insanely popular consoles like the PS2, and it just couldn't keep up in raw numbers. It wasn't a bad console by any means, but it just got beat out. But instead of sticking to the formula, Nintendo decided to do something else. What did they do? They pivoted. They asked, what if every single console we make did something new? Then they released the DS. The DS is where Nintendo puts this new philosophy into practice. It didn't really have the best looking games or even the most powerful hardware, but the console was one of the most unique of the time. The DS had dual screens, a touchscreen, a stylus. It was so different that at first it didn't really make sense. But then people got their hands on it and realized how awesome the console actually was. Now Nintendo were the ones pushing things forward. They were in control. And it's because they were the ones constantly asking, how can we innovate? And that exact mindset is what carried them straight into their peak. On paper, the Wii was a joke. The specs were completely blown out of the water by the PS3 and the Xbox 360. It was basically a slightly upgraded GameCube. But despite that, those same consoles were watching Wii's innovation and trying to keep up. The Xbox literally went on to release the Kinect because of it. That's because the Wii had motion controls, which changed everything.
Control is simple and intuitive, even your mom can play.
Nintendo took a huge risk with that, and it paid off. They were able to balance mass market appeal with genuine novelty. And it wasn't just the motion controls. The Wii was really consumer friendly. It was backwards compatible with GameCube games, and it introduced the Virtual Console, letting you legally buy and play classic games from past systems. They were actually listening to the fans. They were making things feel new and respecting their own history at the same time. The Wii was a crazy success. You could barely find them at the stores. Nintendo was untouchable.
Wii and the DS represent the same thing: risk. Risk allows progress. We're a company that doesn't run from risk. We run to it.
After that, we get the 3DS. The 3DS let you play games in 3D without glasses. Now, did the 3D itself change the world? Not really. But at the time, it was a super unique concept. Nobody else was really doing mainstream portable 3D like that. Then came the Wii U, which didn't exactly perform the best. The idea wasn't terrible, put a screen on the controller itself. But the issue was that the execution was just a mess. Branding wise, people didn't even know if it was a new console or just an add-on to the Wii, so it kind of flopped. But the console itself was pretty good and had some solid games, they just didn't have the install base. And that fact actually becomes really important when we talk about the Switch 2 and the major pitfalls Nintendo took later. Then we get the Nintendo Switch, and honestly, the Switch deserved the hype it got. Dock it and it's on your TV. Undock it and you're playing on the couch, in bed, on the bus. You could honestly just take the console anywhere you wanted. And we got some genuinely great games. We got Breath of the Wild, Super Mario Odyssey, and a bunch of others that really defined the first era of the Switch. They also started bringing over a ton of Wii U games as ports, which is sort of bad on paper, and it was likely the product of the company recently onboarding a lot of greedy businessmen who want to monetize everything. But lucky for Nintendo, at the time it worked. Because it flopped, most people never really owned a Wii U. So for them, these games were basically new, and the ports were actually a decent deal with some quality of life improvements. Even then though, this caused people to see something start to shift. The Switch itself, as a piece of hardware, wasn't as groundbreaking as the Wii or the DS. It was more like, okay, we're combining stuff we've already tried, handheld, docked, motion, portable, and we're packaging it in a really nice way. Innovation was already starting to slow down. The Switch was still good, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't as mind-blowing as some of those earlier leaps were. And after that, we don't really get another wild idea. We don't get the next DS or the next Wii. And that's the perfect setup for the next part of the story, where we went from innovation to the empty upgrade.
The graveyard of any industry is filled with the headstones of companies who decided to keep doing things the same old way, playing only on the margin, making things just a little bit better. That strategy works for a while, but ultimately it's fatal.
Before we get into the major issues that are really highlighted today, there are some things that I need to talk about to set the stage. I mentioned that around the Switch era was when a lot of the innovation started to slow down, and a lot of people chalk that up to one thing: the death of Satoru Iwata. You've already seen him plenty in this video. Iwata wasn't just some random CEO. He was a developer. He played games. He actually understood what made them fun and why they mattered to people. Him, Reggie Fils-Aimé, and Shigeru Miyamoto were genuinely a force to be reckoned with. I'd consider them to be the big three of Nintendo. They were the ones that held the company together when they were all there. They also got along really well with each other and actually cared. The Wii Expo really demonstrated the bond that they had, and something about it felt just about as pure as a corporation can be. When Iwata died, everything changed. The management got reshuffled, and instead of being led by people who lived and breathed game design, Nintendo slowly got taken over by people who live and breathe money. One of which was the infamous, ironically named Doug Bowser, who pretty much became the villain of Nintendo in a lot of people's minds. He actually recently stepped down, but that won't magically fix anything because he was just on the American side. Nintendo is a Japanese company, so he's honestly less to blame than people think. Shuntaro Furukawa, who became Nintendo's president in 2018, received a lot of the blame for how Nintendo runs things. Around this time, Reggie stepped away too, altering the entire makeup of the upper management at Nintendo. Most of the people that helped to build the original Magic aren't really in positions of power anymore. Miyamoto's still there, but he's honestly too old to take the reins or dictate the company's direction anymore. The Nintendo that experimented with the DS, that took risks with the Wii, that tried weird stuff like the 3DS, that version of Nintendo was basically gone. They used to be the gold standard, and now they feel like the Disney of video games, living off old success, milking nostalgia, and relying on childhood memories instead of actually earning your excitement. And we're witnessing the product of this in real time. I'd say the real eye-opener for a lot of people was the pricing for the Switch 2. The console itself was priced at $450, which honestly isn't horrible considering inflation and the upgrades that it had compared to the Switch. I also thought that the fact that you could use the Joy-Cons as a mouse for some games was a pretty cool feature. What really lost a lot of people were the prices for the games. For big titles, $80, and $90 if you wanted the physical copy. A lot of people saw these prices as blasphemous. Some of the prices were walked back after this announcement, like the new Donkey Kong game, but not all of them, and the damage was already done. People saw Nintendo for their greed. I mean, they're even charging money for the tech demo. And what makes the Switch 2 worse is the fact that they did exactly what Reggie warned against. They played only on the margin. The Switch 2 is only a little bit better than the Switch 1. Just to be clear, spec-wise, of course I know that the Switch 2 is significantly better than the Switch 1. But still, it's not really competitive with current gen specs, which I guess is okay because it's a little bit cheaper than other consoles. But when it comes to new features, the Switch 2 is only playing on the margin. Most previous consoles introduced some sort of new innovation, but the Switch 2 doesn't have a whole lot of that. So, what's the selling point? You're pretty much just paying a lot for something that the Switch 1 does decently well for the average person. Considering this, the price just seems like a lot. It was previously justified by some sort of cool new innovation, but again, we don't really have that anymore. And then the Switch 2 tried to do what they did with the Switch 1. They re-released Switch 1 games for the Switch 2. This is where the Wii U indirectly becomes a really important part of the story, because the Nintendo Switch's library was artificially inflated by Wii U releases. At the time it was alright because again, not a lot of people bought the Wii U, and there were some good improvements overall, and it was a decent deal. But Nintendo's trying to do this again, except the issue is that everyone who would have wanted a Switch 2 would have already had a Switch 1, and the games just cost more. Honestly, I wouldn't have expected a price drop because Nintendo never does that for any games. Mario Odyssey is still $60 as years pass. So for a lot of people, they would just be paying more for a game that they already have with very little new content. And some of these re-releases have had a tendency of actually running worse than they did with the older consoles. Paper Mario and the Thousand Year Door for the GameCube runs at 60 FPS on the GameCube and 30 on the Switch. I mean, at this point, you might as well just play these old games on emulators. Why support Nintendo at all? So it's safe to assume that a lot of these re-releases will probably not get many sales. It's almost like the natural consequence of the lack of innovation of the Switch 2. One new feature for the Switch 2 that isn't even that new is the game chat feature, allowing you to talk to your friends while playing. All it is basically a worse reskinned Discord. And you guessed it, they're also charging an extra premium for this. Speaking of paying extra premiums, the new Pokemon game has been a major point of contention for a lot of fans. The base game costs $70. Okay, that's fine, I guess. It lines up with other games in the status quo. But then we also get a day one DLC priced at $30. DLCs are fine, a lot of games have them, but it felt a little greedy here being announced day one of the game. Almost like they're just holding back content for the sole purpose of monetizing it. But then on top of that, people figure out that you kinda have to dish out another $20 for Nintendo Online because there are a lot of Pokemon and Mega Evolutions that you can only get with Nintendo Online. Given all that, that's $120 for the full experience. I don't even think GTA 6 will cost that much. And a lot of these unpleasant details happen to be swept under the rug during the Nintendo Direct. Most of the Direct was talking about the games that were overpriced, ported, or that no one cared about. And the other big part of the Direct, arguably the biggest focus, was the Mario Galaxy movie, which isn't even a game. And Nintendo is a game company, but at least Bowser Jr. looks tough. The focus that they did have on the Galaxy game was of course a ported version that's not very good and marked up by an insane amount. Another aspect I'd say is contributing to slowing down innovation at Nintendo, as much as I hate to say it, is Breath of the Wild's open world. Before you start hating on me for saying that, no, I don't think Breath of the Wild is a bad game. In fact, it might be one of my favorite Nintendo games of all time. But after the success of Breath of the Wild, Nintendo felt like it had to make a bunch of other open world games, even if it doesn't make sense with the franchise they're doing it for. Instead of being like, wow, that was a unique game, it was actually high quality and innovative, they took it as everything has to be open world now if we want it to sell. That's when we get into Mario Kart World. The open world feels tacked on and it pretty much ruined the online mode. Basically, no one uses the open world because it's almost empty besides small challenges that people find boring. So people found an exploit to make it so that they only had a race on the tracks, but Nintendo patched it out. The only fun part of the game. They want people to love the open world, but it's just not good. It worked amazingly with Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, but it's just not the right fit for Mario Kart. They also announced in the Nintendo Direct that Metroid Prime 4 was also going to be open world, which was not received well. The game was announced a long time ago, and they actually reworked the game, probably to tack on an open world, which is a recipe for disaster in my mind. A lot of people are actually saying that Metroid isn't open world. The desert area is sort of a bridge between different areas, but it seems to be suffering from the same issues as Mario Kart World. The desert area seems very boring and empty, which is completely different from what made level design good in the old Metroid games. One of the few decent things to come out of the November Direct was the new Donkey Kong. A lot of people have been saying it's fun, but again we run into a problem. It has a roguelike game mode, and the map isn't randomized, which is a core mechanic of roguelikes. If you don't know, roguelikes are supposed to be run-based, so if it's not random, then the player is just going to find the optimal path to take every run. So it just seems lazy and effortless. Roguelikes are great for getting a lot of playtime from a little bit of content, so it seems like a cash grab. But overall, from the average gamer's perspective, the game is pretty solid to be honest. But even so, that's one good game in a sea of mid. Most of these games being subpar makes not only the price for the games even less worth it, but the console itself. But all these business practices prove that Nintendo is now more soulless and money driven than ever before. And the ripple effects of these changes also have much deeper implications for the industry as a whole. Everything that Nintendo's been doing seems to have shifted the climate of AAA gaming as a whole. Other game companies have started to show signs of extreme greed as well, and the main place I've seen this with recently is Xbox. They had game price hikes right after Nintendo did, and it's just been a downward spiral for Microsoft since then with Game Pass and a bunch of other things, but that's a whole other topic. Let's just say Xbox is not on a good path either. I don't think Nintendo is solely to blame for this, but the climate for AAA games right now is very greed driven, and I can't help but to blame Nintendo for the shift at least a little bit. A lot of these big franchises are emotional anchors like Mario, Zelda, and some others. People see a game affiliated with these popular characters and they immediately feel drawn to it out of nostalgia and trusting a brand that used to be good. A lot of people just forgive the weak entries if they trust the brand. Nintendo knows this, and so they know they can underdeliver on their new releases. And if we look how the stock has behaved, it's reflected a pretty similar sentiment. Let's start with the end of June. June 30th, they announced that the price of the Switch family of systems and products would increase. This caused a little bit of lost momentum, leading to a fairly level July with some spikes during Donkey Kong Bonanza. August rolls around, things are looking pretty decent and investor confidence is high, but then we get the Nintendo Direct and it all goes downhill with an extremely steep drop. A lot of people thought this drop would be more permanent, but then somehow it went back up. People still bought the Switch 2. But after the hype died down for people that still actually wanted the Switch 2, the last few months have been absolutely brutal for Nintendo's stock, with an even crazier drop than the one that happened around the Direct. To be fair, a lot of other Japanese game companies were also struggling around this time with tariffs and other major hits to the economy, and even despite this 33% drop, Nintendo is still doing fairly well for themselves considering the scope of the industry. Based on how many people are still buying Nintendo's products, it gets a little bit scary because the market is inelastic, at least for a large portion of Nintendo's consumers, meaning that people will buy from Nintendo no matter the price. A lot of fans worship anything that they put out regardless of lack of innovation or anti-consumerism because of how attached they are to their nostalgia. Then we get to what might be the worst thing Nintendo has ever done for the gaming industry, which is patenting the game mechanic of using monsters to fight. They probably did this because of Palworld, but still that's really bad. No other company has patented a game mechanic that general before. It really shows how greedy they are, especially considering they did this right before their new Pokemon game. There are so many issues with this, the main one being that it suppresses competition from other games, which also makes them seem like a monopoly. With this type of climate, developers will feel like they're walking on eggshells when making games. It simply limits innovation, and I absolutely hate that. So it's looking like AAA games as a whole are going downhill, and there might be a shift towards indie games. It's crazy to see that some of these companies used to be on top of the world and now a lot of people despise them. Nostalgia is just one of those things that can have such a deep hold on people. It's like a glass cannon. It's very delicate and difficult to pinpoint exactly, but when you do finally find it, it packs a crazy punch. Nostalgia isn't actually about the product itself. It's about who you were when you consumed it. Everyone says this, but people still fall victim to the trap. People still buy or participate in events that bring back these things associated with nostalgia, hoping it will bring that feeling back, but it never does, at least not as much as you would have hoped. As much as I hate to say it, even I would at least consider buying the Switch 2 if I had the money. That's how much of a chokehold Nintendo has on people. But even with this nostalgia, I think if they continue down this path, Nintendo won't be competitive with current consoles. Not only are the prices crazy, but the games are just genuinely not that good. The only path forward I see for the company is people stop buying, they hit rock bottom, and are forced to innovate again. But then again, Xbox is not going down a great path either, so honestly, console gaming really needs to see a change. For now, PC gaming and indie games might just be the move. It's a very weird time for AAA games, so the narrative isn't fixed. If enough people are made aware of the greed, less people will buy, and maybe, just maybe, Nintendo will go back to the company we all grew to love.